Good evening. I have no PowerPoint, and in the back, let's just keep this on because I don't have a headpiece because I intentionally did that so I wouldn't walk away from this podium. Genesis chapter 4 is when we'll be looking tonight, and you're going to join me there. It's a fascinating subject. We're talking about tonight a mindset that we need to make sure we protect against, and that is a mindset of worldly thinking, getting caught up in the processes of this world. And there are a lot of passages that relate to that, but 1 John chapter 2 is one, of course, that where he says that we should not love the world nor the things in the world, and that's something that we are going to discuss. In verse 15, he says, "Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, and the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away in the lust of it, but he who does the will of God abides forever." So his point here is that it's all going to fade away anyway, so do not put your hope in that. Put it in something better, and that is putting in God. And, 1 John chapter 2. And then we also have 1 Timothy chapter 6, where he tells us in verse 6, "Godliness with contentment is great gain. We brought nothing into this world, and it's certain that we can carry nothing out. And so having food and clothing, with these we shall be content." And that's a mindset that we have to develop. Are we content with the things that we have? And then we also look at what he says in verse 17, where he says, "Command those who are rich in this present age not to be haughty, nor to trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God who gives us richly all things to enjoy. Let them do good, that they may be rich in good works, ready to give, willing to share, storing up for themselves a good foundation for the time to come, that they may lay hold on eternal life." So this is what we have to look for in ourselves, is we need to make sure we have the right attitude toward the things of this world, the riches that are around us, recognizing that the love of money is the root of all evil, recognizing that if our attitude toward riches is wrong, then we can lose our salvation. And so he gives them instructions on how they should live, not haughty, but not trusting in uncertain things, uncertain riches, but trusting in God, putting our hope and our faith in God. And we all understand that. We know that. And it's important for us to recognize that. Jesus said that we are in the world, but we're not of the world, that we must live among this place. But we want to make sure that we don't become influenced by the world. It's difficult. It's a difficult place for us to be. And the difficulty, especially in this culture, is our culture is so much about the things, right? It's so much about material things. And we understand the difference between needs and wants, but sometimes those can get blurry. Those lines can get blurry. There's nothing wrong with having more than we need. The Bible doesn't teach us that we can only have the things that are necessary and nothing more. Our attitude toward riches, however, must be that they are not what's important to us. So if we lose all of those things, or we're asked to give them away, we can give them freely because they don't really mean that much to us. And that mindset only comes as we understand riches for what they really are. They're just temporary things that we can enjoy, but probably have a greater use. And if we can understand it and from that perspective, that this is just so much that's going to turn into ash when it's all burned up, and actually nothing. When it's all gone, if we can understand it from that perspective, we will have a lot better time in the pursuits that we have, because we all have jobs, or most of us do. Some of us have retired. We have things that we're pursuing in this world that's not religious, and we all understand that. There's things that you do to support your family. There is nothing at all wrong with that. And so we need to make sure that we don't go too far in either way, right? But as we're trying to live in this world and get by, maybe even be able to collect a little bit so that we can help other people, which is a noble and good thing to do, we have to keep our mindset right about what that is all about, right? So this is kind of the focus of what we're going to be looking at in the book of Genesis, chapter 4. Because here it's an interesting thing. It's not something that you would actually expect to see or think to see in this text. But in studying this out and thinking about what is here, we're able to see some things about us and about humanity and the progresses that we've made, and see a distinction between two lineages. So if you want to put a title to this, I call it A Tale of Two Lineages. There's one that we have of Cain, and there's one that we have of Seth. And this actually is going to come to fruition in chapter 6, whenever it says in verse 1, it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants on the earth in those days, and also after, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. So what we need to understand here is, I'm not going to go into a great bit of detail in chapter 6, because I'm going to cover that later. But for tonight, we need to recognize that there's two lineages that are represented in chapter 6. The first one he calls the sons of God, and the other ones he calls the daughters of men. And as we'll see later on, if you don't have a grasp of this yet, that's okay. But as we see later on, this is not talking about angels that came down and had sexual relations with women of the world. Angels don't do that kind of thing. In fact, Jesus said himself that doesn't happen. It's talking about a lineage where people were following God and a lineage where people were not following God. They were of the world versus from God. And that is Seth and Cain. That's where this actually picks up in chapter 6. Chapter 5 is a genealogy section. So if you just take chapter 5 out, not that it's not important, but for the purpose of this, if you go from chapter 4 and you read through the rest of chapter 4 and then you go right into chapter 6, it's very easy to see what he's talking about there. There's a lineage of both sides that are being represented here. And this, of course, is where we are after Cain kills his brother Abel. You remember when Cain he kind of fulfilled his own prophecy that God would get rid of him, that he would be rejected by God. And so he acted in such a way that actually caused God to reject him. He killed his own brother out of jealousy and rage. And when he killed his own brother, God told him he's going to be a wanderer around the earth. You remember what he told him? Specifically, he told him that he would be cursed. Look at how it's phrased here. And he says in verse 11 of chapter 4, so now you are cursed from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. A fugitive and a vagabond, you shall be on the earth. And Cain said, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Surely you have driven me out this day from the face of the ground. I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond on the earth, and it will happen that anyone who finds me will kill me. So God put a mark on him so that anyone who sees him will know not to kill him. I have no idea what that mark is, and it doesn't matter, because what it was is a representation of God's wrath if you kill that man. And because of that, then, he had a measure of safety, because no one would want to touch him after that idea. And then we go into in verse 16, where it talks about the family of Cain. And we're going to get into that in just a second. But look at what he's saying here in verse 11. He says, you are cursed from the earth. Now, when he cursed in the garden with Adam and Eve, then the curses that were put on them, actually, they weren't cursed. The ground was cursed for his sake. But here in this passage, Abel was actually cursed. And it's also interesting when you look at what he says here, that in verse 12, when you till the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. That's a very hard blow, because if you back up in chapter 4 and you look at verse 2, it says she bore again, this time his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. This is what he knew. This was his livelihood. Now he's going to have to go around and just scavenge for food, learn a new skill, right? But I hate to say that it's like changing careers right in the middle of life, but it's a similar thought that he knows all about this gardening and how to raise crops. And now that's completely taken out of his hand. He can't do anything anymore. I don't know how that works. I guess maybe Carla says she has a black thumb of death. Maybe that's what it didn't work. So however that worked out, he couldn't do that anymore. And so now he's wandering around. And it's interesting because he says God tells him that in verse 12, a fugitive and a vagabond you shall be on the earth. And he says, I'm going to be a vagabond. I'm going to be wandering around, right? Looking for food. That's how he's going to try to take care of himself. Okay, so now we move into, knowing that, we move into verse 16. It says, Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. And he built a city and called the name of the city after his son, Enoch. Enoch was a city, and he named, of course, he named the city after his son. Now, as he is building the city, the word city there, some people have said, well, this is just a few huts that are kind of put together. And we're going to see that it was more than that. In fact, this is really a foundation for future cities. We don't know exactly where this was and a whole lot of information about it, but it is interesting as we see what's happening here that this was something more than just a tribe that was put together. This is an advancement in technology that you may not expect to see. As we continue on, it says that Enoch in verse 18 was born Irad. Irad begat Mehujael. Mehujael begat Methushael. Methushael begot Lamech. Then Lamech took for himself two wives. The name of one was Ada, and the name of the second was Zillah. So Lamech here is a great grandson of Cain. It may be another great in there. I can't remember for sure. And he is one where we have the first person that we have seen that took for himself two wives. Polygamy was not the practice at first. God designed marriage to be one man and one woman for life. And this is the first mention of that. Now, that's an important piece of information because it shows an attitude toward humans that Lamech had developed. Maybe he was taught that way. We already see that because we see it's a little piece of the puzzle. As I was mentioning this morning, if you look at things, you can kind of see, if you look back on something, you kind of see pieces of a puzzle, how they fit together to see, okay, well, I can see why someone is this way. This could be a result of that, because if you look at how Cain treated Abel, how did he treat him? Terribly. He saw him as someone who he was expendable. I'm angry with you. I'm just going to kill you. It doesn't really matter. And he didn't even seem like he was sorry when God confronted him. I don't know where my brother is. It wasn't an accident. He knew exactly what he was doing. And so he killed Abel. And his lineage, imagine that. His lineage picked up on the same attitude toward people. You can see this expressed in polygamy. When we have a polygamous relationship, people can say all they want to and they do this in other cultures. They say, well, this is all about taking care of people, but it's not really the case as I see it. When you look at polygamy, you are seeing someone who is beneath you, who is serving you, and you have more than one. If you have that mentality that you can have more than one of them, more than one wife, that is a look at how you actually see women. How could you imagine that? It's difficult. I mean, men, could you really imagine what it would be like to look at your wife in such a way you say, yeah, I can have two of them or more? It's not computable. And so what we look at here is we see a difference. Now, you may say, well, that could be because there were circumstances we don't know about. That's possible. But continue on with me. We're going to see even more. Ada, in verse 20, Ada bore Jabal, and he was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the harp and flutes. And as for Zillah, she also bore Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. What we see here is actually an advancement. Now, the reason that we can know that it's not just a bunch of tents put together to form a rough city, the reason we know there's some advancements here is because of what he talks about here, of people started developing in different ways. Look at how he mentions this in verse 21. His brother's name was Jubal. He is the father of all those who play the harp and the flute. So at this point in humanity, they have developed to a degree that someone can actually sit around and not only play the flute, but invent it and have the time to learn it. What does that suggest? It suggests that they were advanced enough to where they didn't have to be out in the field tilling the ground every day. If you ask a farmer if he has time to invent a musical instrument and to become known for it, it's not likely that he's going to have that much time. Now, if with modern equipment, maybe it's a little different. But if you're spending all of your time trying to raise food for yourself, how are you going to have time for other things? We also see the development here because he plays the harp and the flute. And we see in verse 22 that Zillah, she also bore Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron. So the Bronze Age and the Iron Age supposedly are separated out. One ended when the other began, and yet they're both here mentioned. How do you have bronze and iron without having some understanding and some learning and some research? This is a development of society. And we also can see what's in the development, why these things would be used. Of course, the harp and the flute would be used for entertainment purposes, meaning that other people would be entertained. It's an interesting part of human nature. When we have free time, we like to do stuff, right? We like to have fun. And so there's that part of that's developing. And then we also have the iron and the bronze, which are easily used to what ends up happening when we create new technology. It's usually first used for military purposes, isn't it? Protection, conquering, this kind of thing is raising up. So we have a civilization that's starting to develop. And it's interesting to me that it's Cain's lineage that actually is developing it. And the reason for that is because when Cain was separated from God and he's kicked out of the area and told he had to be a vagabond and wander the earth, he didn't wander the earth. He created a city. Why? I think it was probably because he wanted to settle in a place. He couldn't till the ground, though. So if you have other people around that can do that, you can help in providing in other means. While they provide the vegetables, you can provide other things. So we're starting to see people working together. And that's not an uncommon thing. People do this. And so when he says that he built a city, he didn't just say that they just had a conglomeration. He meant they had a functioning city where they had some kind of interactions. They had different responsibilities. They had enough wealth and organization and structure that people could get along and have even enough time to create musical instruments and create perhaps weapons of war. At the very least, learn how to smelt and create metals. That's pretty amazing. And it's a very short time. Okay, so this is where we are. Now, consider also how the development of the mindset toward humanity has changed. And you can see a little bit more about what Genesis chapter 6 might be saying. In verse 23, it says, Then Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, hear my voice. Wives of Lamech, listen to my speech. For I have killed a man for wounding me, even a young man for hurting me. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. Now, I want to take that apart just a minute. I know you understand that, but let's look at it. He's telling his wives, and this is kind of a song that he sings. He says, I've killed a man. And the reason he killed a man, he says, for wounding me. And then in Hebrew parallelism, he says, even a young man for hurting me. And this is a further explanation. That last phrase is a further explanation of why he killed this man. It was a young man, and it says, he hurt me. And the word there in the original language is blue. He bruised me, so I killed him. That's the force of what he's saying. Listen, wives. There was a young man who hit me and bruised me. It hurt, so I killed him. And then he said, if Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. That means that he felt like he was more justified in doing what he did, that he would be more protected by God, for he was more justified in that than actually even Cain was. And it shows you how little he thought of other humans, doesn't it? It's nothing to him. He bruised me, so I killed him, and God will avenge me if anybody ever decides to take vengeance on me. That's what we're starting to see develop. Now, in chapter 6, it's gotten to the point, which we're going to talk about later, it gets to the point where humanity is so evil, violence continually, all the time, that all they ever think about is how they can do continually more and more evil. It's a really bad place, but you can see the development of that mindset in the lineage of Cain, and then when they start mingling in together with Seth and Cain's backgrounds, we see the corruption it gets everywhere. And finally gets to the point where God says, I've had enough. They got 120 years and it's over. He's going to kill them all. But it says in verse 25, Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and named him Seth, for God has appointed another seed for me instead of Abel, whom Cain killed. And as for Seth, to him also a son was born, and his name was Enosh. Then men began to call on the name of the Lord. And that's how it ends. And chapter 6 again picks up with those two lineages. At some point, Seth's lineage started to call on the name of the Lord. That's words for trust and worship. And if you think about it then in the what's being said here and how that Cain developed a city because of his situation, it doesn't say anything about Seth doing that. It says that Seth and his lineage began to call on the Lord. They were living for God. Now, I'm not suggesting that it's wrong for us to develop a city. That's not the point at all. But I want you to notice the mindset. I want you to notice how they viewed taking care of themselves. It's easy to see that Cain had to do something to take care of himself, so he built a city. So that he would be protected, he would be helped, and his family would be helped, and the people in the lineage would be helped, and they could work together as one people. In spite of the fact that God's told them to reproduce and fill the world, they were conglomerating in one place, and this will definitely come up after the flood, but they're conglomerating in one place, and they're doing it for their own protection to make sure that the people will not harm them, right? You can see it easily in the fact that they had not only free time for the harps and the flutes, but they also had the metals that were there. And then we have Seth, who trusted God and called upon God. And while it's, like I said, it's not wrong for anyone to create a city, it's not wrong that Cain did this, but it shows you what was important to them, doesn't it? In my mind, I see a group of people who are they're so worried about taking care of themselves, they've not included God, they're not worried about God, they are worried about themselves so much that they devote themselves to this production of this city. And yet Seth's people, doesn't say anything about them at all. So we have then, I think, a progress that we see in both sides. And that to me says that our mindset is very important, that we need to make sure that we are looking at the things of this world in the right way. If I have a job where I feel like I need to go, and the only reason I have this job is because I need to earn money, and that becomes more important to me than anything else, I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to do whatever it takes to take care of me, and I forget God. Doesn't that speak to that? And if I'm not worried about taking care of myself, or I'm depending upon God to take care of me, that's going to be a completely different approach to my life. So as we're looking around in this world, we're going to have to make decisions about, what we're going to do for income, how much we're going to have, what we're going to do, and how much we're going to work. All kinds of things are going to come into play. And we're going to have to make a lot of difficult decisions. Young married families have to make these a lot, right? They got to figure out what is going to work for my family. And how am I going to do this so that we can have a balance? We can actually enjoy life and at the same time provide for life, right? There's all kinds of things that have to come up. And the important thing for us to remember is what we started off talking about, and that is that we have a way of looking at the world, and we decide how we see it. We can love the world and the things of this world and the processes of this world, and we can put those as more important. But we go back to Luke chapter 8 and verse 11 and following, where Jesus explains the parable of the sower. And in this, the sower sowed seed among thorns. He said those thorns that grew up, in the explanation, that was the desires and pleasures of this world that get in the way and keep them from producing fruit. So in our pursuits, let us make sure that we give room and we're not consumed with the pursuit of the things of this world to try to make this world work right. It doesn't really matter. In the end, it's going to go away. We're here for a short time. Let's make the best of it by not getting caught up in the worldly things, in the worldly processes, but getting caught up in the things that God wants us to be about. Put him first. Let it be known that we are people of the lineage of Seth, that we trust in God, and we don't worry about anything else. Well, this has been a lesson about priority, and I hope that it's been a benefit to you as you think about how you're making decisions in the world, and to remember that worldliness is something that seeps in. You don't have to be caught up in sin to be worldly. It's all about our attitude, what we're seeking, what's important to us. So if we can help you this evening, if you need any prayers of the church, or if you would like to be baptized, anything that we can do to help you, won't you please let that be known, and won't you please come as we stand and sing.